You're 62 years old, married, and you've built up $3 million in your 401k, and you may be asking yourself the question, should I consider doing Roth conversions? That's what we're going to look at in our video today. Hello, my name is John Vandergriff. I'm one of the owners and the wealth planning team lead at Blue Ridge Wealth Planners, where we help people answer questions just like this one in terms of how they need to make retirement decisions and create an overall retirement plan. And so we're going to dig into some of the factors that we need to consider today with this important decision and how you can go about doing that, or how you can go about contacting someone to help you in this exact area. So as we look at this, obviously decisions about taxes and Roth conversions are not made in a vacuum, so we want to make sure that we're looking at really all 5 of the areas that we look at in a holistic retirement plan: how we provide our income, how we need to structure investments to do that, also considering tax impacts to both income and investments, but really tax structure of accounts and how do those need to shift. How are we going to cover healthcare expenses over time from what you've saved? And then how do we make sure that this money goes to your generations or is there for your spouse in the right mechanism if something happens to you or both of you at some point in the future? So as we look at this, obviously, starting with the goals and objectives that are unique to your situation is pivotal to be able to make the right kind of decisions as we look at this. So, all right, so let's look at this situation. We've got a 60-year-old couple or 62-year-old couple want to retire now, have $106,000 of gross income. Combined pension and Social Security is how that's made up between the 2 Social Security checks taken at 62, and then a pension of $5,000 a month. Their need is roughly $100,000 a year net, so essentially not very much of a need off of their investment portfolio as they exist today. $3 million in 401ks, $50,000 in bank cash. So as we look at our example here, with their income needs basically taken care of by Social Security and pension, with both of which having cost of living adjustments, the stress on the investment portfolio from an income perspective is not really present today, because as we look at it, when we start to have decisions and conversations around investments, we have a very simple formula of how we want to divide that up, and really kind of an order of importance of how we want to make those decisions. So first, as we just hit on and looked at, we want to be aware of how much income we need off of this money. If it's essentially none, like we look at in this particular situation, then that takes some of the pressure off of that decision. We move to the next one. If you aren't in that position and maybe you don't have a good pension, you're just with Social Security, you need to really solve for that income need first from good, safe areas. So finding those areas of investment, being able to position to provide that income with inflation factored in for at least the next 10 to 15 years is something that we look at. Then that allows you to move to the second area, which is how do we want to add risk into the portfolio, and really want to is the right way to talk about this, because as you may exist today or transition into retirement, you probably have a majority of this portfolio in long-term horizon investments, risky investments. We want to make sure that that risk is appropriate. Once we get our income needs covered, then you can start to divide this up into how much of this money do I need to have accessible, which means liquid and less overall risk, and then how much of this needs to stay in long-term growth positions, which is still important in retirement to help us cover things like inflation or additional costs that happen later in life. So again, once we get our income needs covered, then we can start to divide this and look at how much do we need for access, how much do we need for growth, and then once we have gotten those positions correct from a risk perspective, then we want to have the conversation of how do we maximize the tax diversification that we have to really give us the best benefits in each of these areas that we look to invest. Well, the issue that we have in this first situation today is that we don't currently have a lot of tax diversification, because as it exists now, if their current income is $106,000, federal tax rate is 12%. Is their top dollar. And so if we want to do any kind of Roth conversions, that will be the starting place for those conversions to occur. And again, I'm sure like many of you, they have a majority of their money in pre-tax dollars they do have some after-tax dollars in their bank positions, but currently no money in tax-free accounts. And so as we look at this, depending on the situation and what we want to look at, does it make sense to start taking money from this pre-tax bucket and funneling it down into tax-free buckets or even after-tax positions, but trying to create more tax diversification? Because if we do that, then we can start to leverage that from an investment perspective, because as we think about it from just a common knowledge perspective, if we have three different tax buckets that we just highlighted: pre-tax, after-tax, which is going to be a non-taxable base with taxable gains on the growth, and then tax-free, which would be properly structured life insurance or Roth IRAs. If you had equal amounts of money in each of these, you would want to try to bias your risky assets into your Roth buckets, as we're looking at now, primarily for growth, because the better those do, you don't have to share that additional gains that you have, a percentage of that with the government. You would ideally have it in a tax-free bucket. On the flip side of this, if we know that we need income in retirement, or we're going to be forced to take distributions later, like an RMD, required minimum distribution, then that could be something that we want to have in this pre-tax bucket in a safer allocation that is more positioned to cover our income needs. And then our access bucket in an ideal world could be in our after-tax funds, like this couple has with their bank dollars, just so that any gains are taxable, but the base of that has a cost basis that is not taxable. So as we look at these buckets of money, we want to be in a position where ideally, if we had even thirds in these, we would try to position this appropriately just to get the best benefit from the investment buckets at our disposal. But for this particular couple, there is some work that needs to be done to do that. So what we're going to assume, if we look later at some projections, is the investments are the exact same. So we're not changing any of the investment structures today, but that is something that we look at for client families that we work with, of how do we need to invest money? How do we leverage that? How do we choose how to convert and where to convert from? All those things are very important. But we've got to look at this particular situation and see, does it make sense today from where they are from a tax perspective to start pulling those dollars down and paying taxes on it? So what we have to look at here is going to be the number of what is their income now versus what will that income be in future tax years. So again, as we see here, 12% is their top tax rate that goes up to $123,000. As we had talked about, just for reference, you have $106,000 of gross income today between pension and Social Security. And so if they wanted to do conversions up to the top of this tax bracket, somewhere around $16,000, $17,000 they could do at 12%, then they would jump into the 22% bracket or even the 24%. And so as we look at that, one question becomes, why would we consider doing that? Well, again, depending on how much cost of living goes, how much cost of living affects income tax brackets, what we know is that the current tax code is set to expire in 2026. What we see here is that their 12% bracket would become 15. So any of those dollars that were paid at 12 today would be in a 15% bracket later. The 22% dollars would be at 25, and the 24% dollars would be at 28. And they're roughly similar brackets, so we're not talking about drastically different levels of income that you hit. But again, based on the numbers that we have looked at, what we find is that if you can leave the account at a lower percentage, it is better for you to do it then than wait till a time later where that percentage is higher, even if you're growing the money and not using it over time. So as we look at this, if we can pay 12 instead of 15, it makes sense. If we can pay either 22 or 24 instead of 25% on those dollars, that could also make sense in the best use of these funds moving forward. And then if we get into a time where taxes are noticeably different, what you will see here is this is 1981's brackets adjusted for inflation to 2024 dollars today. What you will notice is that their current income, even though it's just barely above this, their top dollar would be in the 32% bracket, which is not quite, but almost 3 times where that top dollar is now. Not saying that we're going to 1981's brackets, but I don't think that we'll stop at 2026 brackets and do any meaningful change to the current debt situation that we're facing. So we've got to look at this from a standpoint of how do we make the best decisions knowing what we have information today, looking backwards, but not knowing with full clarity what the future is going to look like. And so as we look at this, the thing that we've got to reckon with in this situation is the reality that this couple doesn't really need anything from their investment bucket. And so if they listen to many advisors, most people say, well, if you don't need this tax-deferred money, don't take it out now, just push it to the future so that you don't have to pay taxes, enjoy the low tax rates while you can. Well, the issue with that is the impact of RMDs. RMDs being required minimum distributions. The way the rules are now, if you are within, 9 years away from RMDs at 73, your starting amount is 73, or starting age is 73. If you're not, if you're further out than that, it is 75 as the rules today. So this couple would be in the 75 age to start distributions. So if we just look at it and said if they had $3 million today, they had a 5% growth on this money, however they invested it, and no withdrawals taken, this bucket would grow to $5.65 million by the age of 75. And if that was the bucket value whenever they turned 75, their RMDs were going to require them to take roughly 4.07% out of this bucket, which would translate to an RMD of $230,238. The issue is, again, when we factor in Social Security and pension with a inflation adjustment, a cost of living adjustment of 2.54% a year, we add the taxable part of Social Security at 85%, what we find is their total income at that point is going to be $367,000. And the truth is, if they keep their lifestyle expenses like they are today, they don't need this much money to live on. They are forced to take out a noticeably higher amount than what they are taking out today. And to put this in perspective, because a lot of people will say, well, you got to factor in inflation as those brackets go up. Well, let's do inflation backwards. Let's say this number, 13 years from now, if we looked at it in today's money, this would be roughly $265,000 in 2024 dollars. And so if we factor that into the equation of these decisions, since we do know where those brackets are now, that would be bumping this couple up into the 24% tax bracket today with their top dollar versus the 28% bracket later, or going all the way up into the 54% bracket when it comes to 1981. So as we look at this, I think that there is a very good chance that this couple could have a noticeably higher amount of income later and potentially pay a pretty bit higher taxes. But since we don't want to work with things that we don't know for sure, because obviously, you could make these adjustments look a certain way to where it would be crazy not to do Roth conversions, we do want to use some softwares that we can look at to see if this is a good decision based on not changing their investments, but simply doing some conversions based on what factors we know now. So what this does, this is software that allows us to do some projections. So what we're looking at is this couple's situation, their income needs, their savings amounts that they have currently in a position where, as we look at it, they're at roughly $3 million now. And then what we're looking at is if they did no conversions, they have forced distributions out, how their money is able to grow based on a 75-25 split. So 75 tracking the Russell 1000 Growth Index, 25% tracking the Barclays Aggregate Bond Index, just for informational purposes. This is not an investment recommendation. This is just simply letting you know what the investment choices are. If you work with us or we have conversations, we can plug your investment specifically into this to see what your projections look like. But what's interesting with this software is we can look at the differences if we choose to do Roth conversions, not of the entire bucket, but of filling up what is today's 24% bracket, or if the tax rates change in 26, what is the 28% bracket at that time. And what we did the math on here is let's do conversions from now for 12 years, only filling up those brackets as they exist in 2026 brackets versus the brackets as we exist today. Again, brackets could change and go higher than that. We're not looking at any projections that we're filling in manually. We're just using some of the inputs of the software. And what it's telling us is the impact of those conversions on the short term, but also a long term. So as we look at this type of conversation, we've got some tools in our tool belt to be able to look at the impact of if we do conversions, if we don't do conversions, if we try to convert the entire thing versus if we only try to fill up certain tax brackets. Those are things that are at our disposal to see if we are making good decisions and what are the impacts of those decisions based on the factors that we're aware of now. So again, as we look at this, in this particular projection, this does show that the Roths catch up by the end, and the end being until they're age 90. Again, this is assuming the brackets do not change higher than the 2026 brackets that we highlighted earlier. So again, if tax brackets did go up, you would start to see an impact on this, not necessarily on the RMDs that are coming out, but how much of those after-tax dollars would be reinvested back into the plan as we look at it overall. So again, what we want to do for you or anybody that's in a similar situation to what we're highlighting today is really walk you through a conversation to see if these type of conversions could make sense for your situation. Obviously, we're looking at a very specified example here. We want to look at your individual situation and see if the benefits of Roth conversion are there today or not, and if so, how much could make sense for you to convert, and then if we could be a good partner for you to walk you through those conversations, those conversions, and how you need to make investment decisions and tax decisions with the amount of money that you've saved to hopefully help you keep as much of this money as possible. So if you see the link below this video, I would encourage you to click that, schedule a time with us here at Blue Ridge Wealth Planners to see if we can help you make some decisions. It may not be time for you to do Roth conversions, but we want to have that conversation with you one-on-one to see if this advice specific to your situation could be of benefit based on where you're at now, where things could go later, and the overall impacts of those decisions. So hopefully this was valuable to you today. If you learned anything or maybe have any questions, feel free to leave us some comments. If you know someone who's in a similar situation to this, maybe share this video with them or subscribe to our channel so we can share more content like this with you in the future. But as far as what we have to share, that's all for today. We look forward to sharing more information with you in the future.